Hello, everyone. My name is Bartosz Nowosielski, and with Aleksandra Sasińska, we are product managers at Miquido, a full-service software development company. And it's my pleasure to welcome you to the first edition of the Innovation Wave Entertainment webinar. Firstly, we have some important news to share.
Innovation Waves Entertainment. It's a new series of webinars organized by us, so Miquido team. And as the music and entertainment industry is changing rapidly, we decided to discuss these new opportunities and challenges of the sector during the events. And we'll bring together a lineup of expert speakers from the music and entertainment business to share their knowledge and insights with all of you, dear participants. And today we are going to discuss generative AI and how it can accelerate music business. So anytime during the webinar, you can type the questions on the chat, and we'll gather all of them for the Q&A session, which will be the last part of our meeting today.
And now it's time to introduce our expert speaker, Pete Downton. Is a respected music and tech executive with a strong background in the digital transformation. He played a key role in the Warner Music Group shift to digital, working with industry giants like Apple, YouTube, and Spotify. As the deputy CEO of 7 Digital, he led the company to go public and secured high-profile clients like a TikTok and the Universal Music Group. Today, Pete focuses on the growing Miquido, an innovative AI-enabled software company globally. He is also chairs Gixon and holds board positions at the Centralized Me and Medi Music. Pete, welcome.
Thank you, Bartosz. And it's wonderful to be here and joining the very first one of these events. And it's even better that we're talking about a subject that we can claim to be experts in for a moment, because everyone is learning every day when it comes to a topic of generative AI. So great to be here.
Great.
Warm welcome again.
Since we have only 1 hour, I'll go straight to the points and ask you, Bartek, what is generative AI and how is it different from AI itself?
Yes, so first things first, so just briefly introduce you to the topic. So the artificial intelligence refers to the field of creating machines that can perform tasks requiring human-like intelligence. And generative AI, it's a kind of subset of AI focused on the producing new content using models capable of creating realistic data, such as images, text, and more, based on existing examples. So generative AI is just a simple words, is a specific application with the broader landscape of AI technologies.
Okay, sounds difficult. And Pete, how would you define the music industry today, so we can then merge two topics together?
Okay. Well, on this occasion, I'm playing the role of recovering record company executive. So what I'm going to try and do is give a summary of the industry from that perspective. And I think I'd start by saying that when you think about the music industry, you really have to break it down into a number of different constituencies. When I talk about the music industry, I think about creators and the music they create. I think about the infrastructure that's necessary for them to reach audiences today. And I think about the business models that support that. And I'm thinking about the fans, how fans are accessing music. And so I'll spend a couple of minutes just explaining the structure as it is today, because I think that's important as a reference point. I don't want to spend too much time talking about history, but if you think about when technology hit the music industry in the late 90s, early noughties, the industry responded in a certain way. We were back in the days of Web 1, we were back in the days of low bandwidth, and the industry really struggled and wrestled with the challenge to maintain the status quo, to keep the business alive as this huge technology change was happening to the industry. And consequently, most of the models around distribution and consumption today are still really born out of that period. And so the way I would describe it is, different from industries that really started to grow around the late noughties, the 2008, 2009, that had the benefit of cloud infrastructure and technologies that allowed far more agile ways to distribute their products and services. And I think that's really well exemplified by something like the fintech industry, that in 2008 went through started a decade of innovation where, using cloud infrastructure and APIs, suddenly consumers started to see the emergence of fintech businesses, challenger banks. I think there were 5 in the UK in 6 years, which is more than we'd had in 600 years. I think what's really interesting is that the music industry is now starting to have the opportunity to innovate in a similar way. And so when I think about distribution today, we think about music being, 10 million creators who are kind of releasing music across all the streaming services. We think about maybe 250,000 to 300,000 creators actually making a living from music. And we think about maybe 1,500 to 1,000 superstars globally. Since that first launch of streaming services in 2000, digital service in 2003, we've gone from 200,000 songs on iTunes to 100 million songs available today, spurred largely by this kind of first wave of AI that has really already started to define music and music distribution. And we also look at the economics of the industry, about $85 billion industry across live and recorded music and publishing, split about 50-50. So we've seen huge growth in the last decade. However, we still see that the growth is kind of dominated by these centralized platforms, these big Uber players in the marketplace. And so I think when we look at the industry today, we see the end of this kind of first wave of digital innovation. And I think we're starting to see shifts and changes as a result of AI already out there, but I think we're going to see that accelerated.
Yeah, so since we have many of the creators today with us, my next question will be, when it comes to the music creation, are there any tools already leading to explosion of creativity? I remember that before our today's webinar, you mentioned Boomi or Master Channel. And can you see some potential risks and maybe chances in using solutions like this?
I mean, just from a music perspective, we've already seen, so Boom is a great example, a single platform that makes the process of creating music far more accessible to those who have got an inclination and some talent globally. And so it's funny when there's a lot of discussion within the music industry about the fact that there are 10 million people creating music, and that is seen as being a huge number compared to what historically has been the case. But the CEO and founder of Boomi in a recent interview was saying he thinks that's a tiny number. His perspective was there are 8 billion people on the planet, and if you think only 10 million have got a story to tell and a song to deliver to the world, you're dramatically underestimating the level of creativity in society. And I think he has a point. And so I think already we've seen this explosion. So one platform representing 14% of all the music commercially available in the world is quite an astonishing development in a relatively short space of time since 2019. However, the next wave of creativity, I think, is going to be supercharged with these new tools, and particularly generative AI. So I think it goes without saying that when creators create, they deserve to be compensated for their work, and they need to be credited for the work. So there are a whole series of conversations and issues around copyright and about how we make sure that creators are rewarded for the use of their works in some of these large language models. Fortunately, today isn't a legal call, and so I'm going to leave that to others and other calls to discuss, but I think it's a given that we need to always be mindful of that and the way that this technology is leveraged.
Okay, so what do you think, Peter? Will the future with GenAI bring us more and more superstars because they have possibilities to bring more and more music in an easy way?
I mean, it's interesting. I think, on one side, I look at this kind of 10 million people releasing music onto a service, and you see very low activity for the majority of those new people coming into the market. So this kind of 250,000, 300,000 professional creators are still dominating the revenue streams. But underneath that, you start to see this kind of hyper-local trend happening. And so you see, I mean, just this week, artists from India, artists from Africa are starting to really take center stage when it comes to global reach. And I think we're going to see a lot more of that. So I do think we are going to see a different class of superstar, because historically it was really hard for artists signed in those markets to get global distribution. However, I think at another side of this, we need to think about ways for artists and creators who've got smaller opportunities in terms of reach to better monetize and to build deeper engagement strategies with their local audiences and to build sustainable livings in a different way. So I think yes to more global superstars. I think where they come from is going to be interesting to see how that evolves and how that marries and matches with the technologies. But I do think that really, you know, hyperlocal artists are going to really set the standard, and they're really going to drive a lot of the innovation when it comes to the use of these technologies.
Okay, it touches the topic of the music distribution, which is currently very centralized. So most of the market is taken by a few big players, as you mentioned also. And such market consolidation often results in a lack of a need and lack of a push for innovation. It happens, but unlike in our industries, here in Miquido, we see a big drive to adapt AI to distribution and client-facing processes. So when we work with a number of e-commerce providers, now they are desperate to embed ChatGPT-like solutions into shopping processes to give users possibility to chat with the product catalog instead clicking through it. So these are some trends when it comes to distribution within these cases. And do you think that such experience is something we can expect only in music? Would you elaborate on that? What are your thoughts when it comes to music distribution in?
Well, I mean, music distribution as it stands today is a function of the business model that I was talking about earlier, where you have a handful of huge global distributors, a handful of huge global services, and that's true in the live industry as well. So for me, when I think about the music industry, you have to think the two side by side. And so on one level, as the creativity changes, as tools change the art of the possible in terms of the kinds of experiences that creators can deliver, I think that also creates a demand for and a need for distribution to evolve really quite rapidly relative to historic terms, to trying to support those opportunities. So the real challenge for the music industry right now is that it began life as a wholesale business, and it's continued to be and act like a wholesale business. And what I mean by that is, when I was at Warner Music Group in the late 90s, early noughties, we had 50,000 retailers around the world. And we used to manufacture physical product, and we used to ship physical product to those retailers around the world. And that really meant that for efficiency's sake, we had to focus on very streamlined operations that made sure that we knew what we were delivering, how much it cost to produce, and how much it would retail for. So we, to a large degree, let retailers decide what the price should be, really have a big role in determining what the product should look like. Whereas we now live in a world where we can reach audiences globally. And so that already means that we have a bigger role. Anyone who's helping support artists to build audiences has a bigger role in understanding consumer demand, and really can play a much bigger role when it comes to consumer experiences. But to do that, you need data. And so by becoming a wholesale industry and sticking with the knitting, what's really happened is that a lot of the companies that represent the most successful artists in the world don't really have that touch point with the consumer, don't have the data that's necessary to inform those decisions and to play a role as a trusted advisor to those artists. And I think that's where I see a great potential for those companies to start to leverage some of the tools that we've already seen in industries like the fintech industry. So the use of chatbots to be able to facilitate feedback loops with consumers. And if you think about generative AI, it allows you to do that at far greater scale than would have been previously the case. So the risk reward equation when it comes to determining whether or not you want to go direct to the consumer has changed quite significantly in two ways. One is it's a lot more cost effective to manage those mass relationships with audiences, to collect the data, to use generative AI to help you make sense of the data, to analyze it, at least at a very simple, basic level, at an entry level. And you can do that in a really cost effective way. But then it allows you to start to think about how those experiences might change over time. And one of the really interesting developments we've seen recently is when you start to look at live experiences beginning to mirror the experiences we see online. So if you think about some of the immersive experiences, there's a great one in London at the moment called the Hockney Show, which has had 60,000 visitors through a single space, which essentially delivers an experience in sound and vision. In the case of the Hockney Show, the first one they've launched, that's really about telling the story of an artist and how that artist has evolved over time and how they've used painting and photography to tell the stories that they want to tell. Now, if you think about that in the music world, there's no reason that an artist couldn't use a similar space to deliver multimedia experiences to similarly large audiences. So 60,000 visitors a month, I mean, that's a great business opportunity, but it's also an opportunity for the artists to express themselves in a way that would previously have required huge investment in the physical part of the delivery. So they, really, if you want to support an artist, you need to be thinking about all of their touch points with the consumers. What's the art of the possible today? And making sure that you can support that. And a big part of that is these feedback loops. So like it or not, companies that have shied away from direct to consumer until now are going to have to learn those skills. But fortunately, the tools to do that in a far less expensive way than was previously the case, are already in our hands.
Okay, so I can assume that AI somehow can improve the end user experience, but what do you think, Pete? Will AI accelerate the centralization in the music industry? Can generative AI contribute to streaming client revenue streams for artists?
I'm certain it can, and I'm certain it will, for a period of time, I think lead to a lot of innovation away from the bigger players. So right now, you're looking at the market share in recorded music. Majors have fallen from mid 80% down to about 75% there or thereabouts. So that's a significant drop in terms of relative share over the last 5 or 6 years. Well, since 2016, the change accelerated really. But actually, the business has been growing for everyone. So those businesses, even the existing incumbent record companies and distributors, have still done better than they would have done previously. The economics of their business are still strong. So I think what we'll see over the next period is a lot of innovation in some of the smaller players, a lot of innovation direct to fan. And I think the major record labels and some of the major distributors are trying to learn from that. What I think is really interesting is that distributors, having really had to stick to the knitting in terms of supporting distribution into the current generation of streaming services, also have an opportunity to offer expanded services to creators, whether they're serving them from large labels or just individual creators from their bedroom. And I've seen markets like Japan. I'm involved in a business over there called Zyko that has had about 17,000 live streams since COVID began, when this is a ticketing business that pivoted into live streaming. And you see creators there who are generating more than $1 million of revenue with no infrastructure at all. Now, again, it's always really, the opportunity is a function of the creator themselves. You can't, with the best distribution in the world, with the best marketing team and the best technology in the world, you're not going to create a sustainable long-term business unless you have great talent. So everything we do is to think about these technologies, force multipliers for creatives. But I think it really is true, the case now, that those individual creators have got the potential to help define what the new consumption paradigm looks like, in the same way as we've seen historically as films went from being black and white to color, and then from silent to talkies. It was the stars, it was the directors who really made the best use of those technologies. And I think we're going to see a period of experimentation, and then think we'll start to see what works you do more of, right? It's simple. You repeat the things that are successful, and if you can do them at scale, well, then that evolves the market.
Yeah, so on the other side of the distribution is just simple consumption. Yes. So when we think about consumption, we kind of believe or observe in Miquido that AI music ends up with just a curated playlist. Like, yeah, here is your favorite artists and some similar songs to your favorites. And unlike again in other industries, the adaptation is much wider. And over the 5 years, we built complex machine learning models for banks, insurance companies, and etc., but none for music. How do you think will this change somehow?
I think this is for me, the most exciting part of what we now have the potential to see, and I think we're almost certainly going to see. If I think back to 2003 when iTunes launched, for the first few years, we did a lot of experimentation. We created artist bundles that were, the deluxe version of an album that would have extra tracks, extra information, the context behind which the recordings would be made. And we consistently saw that between 25 and 35% of the sales of those downloads, there were albums at the time, were the more expensive versions, because the fan base wanted to get a hold of this extra information, this extra content. However, as we moved over to streaming, I think utility kind of took the driving wheel, and we saw, distribution really narrowed down to serve this kind of paradigm of a search bar and filters and the kinds of structures that were put in place. I would always say that it felt very much like picking your music from a spreadsheet. I think the most exciting thing about these new technologies is the potential to personalize the user interface really, really deeply to the user, and that will flow across platforms. So that will be the same on your smartphone, your smart TV. And that's really where the next, I think, 5 to 10 years of innovation, it will follow the creativity, right? Distribution really is there to serve the two ends of this chain of three. And as a music fan, I've been waiting for this for years. And if you want to get an idea of what that might look like, just go on ChatGPT and say, tell me about what was happening in Bowie's life when he recorded Hunky Dory, yeah? And you start to see the kind of core of what's necessary to build more dynamic experiences, richer experiences. And so, yes, new artists will create new bespoke content using the tools that they have in their hands, but there's also a huge potential to deliver richer experiences based on what already exists just by curating that content and delivering it in a way that's appropriate for fans. So that, for me, is, I've stuck around for 25 years in this industry because I wanted to get to the point where I could go deeper and go deeper into these experiences. And I now know as a keen amateur when it comes to technology that there's no excuse for us not serving fans in that way. And there's going to be less restrictions on creators who want to innovate.
Okay, so that was a little bit also of your perspective and a dream of the future. You would have this bonus tracks, but with the help of AI, maybe somehow, because
and we've already seen that what can be done. If you look at DJs like Alan Walker, the global fan base he's built by really understanding his community, by co-creating with his core fan base and then making that available to a wider network. If you look at what some artists have already done over the last 4 or 5 years using Discord to build communities, all of these things, the pieces are there, right? A lot of behaviors we've already seen. And for me, you experience, you repeat, and then you're into a space where social copying allows you to take good experiences to much greater audiences. So yeah, I really think we're at the start of, for me, the most exciting period in innovation in this industry.
So do you think the GenAI can have somehow have bigger impact on the relationship between the artists and their fans? Because you mentioned that before, but if you can tell us something more about how, okay, Discord, okay, some generating content for Discord, but do you know any other tools that helps enhance this relationship? Because when I read the materials and the reports, some artists told that they have poor relationship between them and their fans, because this is only through the performances, but during the concerts, but there is the lack of like, you know, some kind of face-to-face contact. So will I bring a revolution to this sport also? What do you think?
I think it certainly has the potential to do that. I think the you know, if you look at the shape of the music industry, and we talked about the different participants in it, truthfully, the creators themselves have always run the music industry. They've just been really busy making music, and therefore they were never really able to influence the distribution networks and mechanisms in a way that enhance their relationships with their fans. They've always been very much, you know, they try to do that on the edges. Whereas now you start to look at the way that companies, people like EA and others in the gaming world, are innovating using some of these tools to manage things like toxicity in networks, to make it possible to engage with your fan base without having to hire a team of 50 people to manage the complexity of that. And so suddenly these smaller management companies, smaller record labels, artists themselves are able to step into this world where they can manage direct conversations with their audiences and create feedback loops that previously would have been really, really quite difficult to support financially, or to manage in a practical sense. And so there's a graveyard of direct-to-consumer businesses that have been built up over the last 20 years, because what you tended to see was there was little peaks of interest in direct-to-fan activities, but then the reality of a cycle of recording, releasing, and touring meant that successful artists got pulled into this kind of conveyor belt in many ways. And so they were able to innovate because they had the capacity to do that, and the influence, but that didn't really filter down the system. I think now this next wave of innovation is going to be top down and bottom up simultaneously. So suddenly we'll start to see what those models are. Anyone who says they know what they look like, I think, are probably a little bit too sure of their own opinions, because we're all watching, we're all learning. But certainly the tools exist now to facilitate those relationships in a way that wasn't possible previously.
From the other perspective, because right now it just popped into my head, from the perspective of the creator, when she is facing a blank page syndrome, and sometimes maybe he has no contact with the end users or the listeners, fans. Do you think that some AI-powered tools can help overcoming these creative blocks? Because that was something I wanted to ask before when we were talking about creativity, but
I think that all comes into this kind of the art of the possible, really. I have a lot of friends who make music. Some make music for half a dozen friends and family. Some are making music for huge audiences, and all of them in common are saying to me that they're using these tools to spend more of their time really creating. So artists who used to spend a number of weeks getting themselves to the point where they were really, you know, finessing a recording, a track, a song, are getting there faster because they can use these tools to automate some of the things that were quite manual in the recording process. Others, you know, very much, if you look at songwriting, how it evolves in an artist's career, there are different periods when they have a story to tell, something to say, and I think these are things that can help stimulate that creative process for those who necessarily don't have the same experiences to draw upon. Because I think everyone, we're all social beings. I mean, you know, fundamentally, these technologies are force multipliers. It's about supporting human creativity. And at the end of the day, you still need the human. But if you can provide support for that human to be more creative, to be more productive, particularly if you think about the idea of moving from audio to audio visual. The visual aspects have been really diminished in the industry over the last 20 years as we've moved to this kind of more utility distribution model. And so the cost and the skills required to make videos or to make imagery that sits alongside the words, these are massive benefits for artists. About 30% of all music consumption share of ear comes from video related services, about 20% from YouTube, and about 10% from things like TikTok, and that's growing. So if you can give someone the tools that helps them create a visual component while they're doing the recording, that's a massive asset. That's a massive resource for them. And it helps stimulate their creativity. But it also, the tools to collaborate around those things now exist. And through COVID, what we saw was artists changed the way that they recorded. Even the ones who were in the studio were using these tools to bring other people into the recording sessions, because it was no longer necessary for everyone to travel to a city and to use an expensive studio at the same time. So I think, the tools will be used by creators, and that will shape the way those tools evolve.
That makes sense. I was also thinking about these two streams of inspiration. So one is the direct feedback from the fans, and the other might be this, I don't know, maybe not surprise factor, but something generated. So the artist can agree or not to something, create like some prompts from artificial intelligence. And it's much different than this dialogue with fans.
And I think it's important to recognize that artists create differently, right? So if I think about my experience, Warner Music has an artist who is one of the most creative individuals on the face of the planet, Enya, who works very closely with Nicky Raya, manager, who's also part of the act. When they create, they go into a castle which has a recording studio, and no one sees them till they're finished, right? There's almost very little, there's very little contribution from external people when it comes to the A&R process. Others need people around them. They seek out inspiration from others around them. And so again, far be it from me to have too strong an opinion about what that creative process looks like, but having worked with and been alongside many artists during that process, I know that these tools will help all of them in different ways.
Yeah, that's interesting. And now changing the topic slightly, because we are here also to talk about the business side of this music business. So again, we know that it's very popular to implement a number of AI-based solutions for document processing or searching for information. And it happens especially in heavily regulated industries. And would you expect something similar to happen in music? Because if we turn our attention to the people's jobs, what they do today, so marketing, accounting, design, etc., and ask how many of the 26,000 people employed by the 4 largest music companies are likely to be doing the same job in 5-10 years from now? Or do you think that GenAI affects the actual businesses with the music industry and the people working there? What are your thoughts and opinions on that?
I think it's first thing to note is that even at that $85 billion, the size of the industry today, it's still at an all-time low in terms of share of entertainment spend. So there's the broader context is that a lot of these changes allow the music industry to compete in ways that they couldn't previously with film and games and other areas. So I think that the pie should get larger if we can help creators make this transition to reach the potential of their relationship with their fans, rather than where we are today. But it's unquestionably going to have a significant impact. That 26,000 numbers was the 3 major labels and one of the largest distributor, Believe. Just looking at the employees they have on LinkedIn today, it's very reference ready. But 30% of those 26,000 are working in marketing. So that's that's 9,000 people working in marketing around those business marketing, design, and art related roles. I mean, if you think about what generative AI can enable, of course that's going to change. If you think about the idea to use generative AI to support decisions on marketing spend, that's obviously going to change. And I think we'll go through a transition. I think someone described this in a podcast I heard the other day, is we're moving into the kind of co-pilot phase. So this computer period really is about assistive computing. And so to start with, this is like having an assistant who can analyze data, help you make better decisions really quickly. But of course, that starts to move to really the autopilot. At what point do we get the ability to look at signals in the market data and then to move capital, allocate more spend against artists or different opportunities that are clearly having resonance with audiences? So that unquestionably will change. And I think it's really important that the industry reflects on, when I look at the number of people working across those businesses in IT and engineering, there's less than 1,000. And yet they're operating in an environment where Google have upwards of 50,000 engineers. Yeah. Amazon have upwards of 70,000 engineers, and Apple have upwards. I mean, the industry needs to think about the skills it needs in-house in order to navigate this change. That doesn't mean trying to match those companies and partners engineer by engineer, but really they need to have an understanding of how these technologies will change the art of the possible. And that needs to be informing the decisions they make, because those decisions will determine how well they can serve the artists that they represent.
Yeah, so one thing for sure is data. So we already knew before GenAI that data is king, and now maybe thanks to the technology, we can actually use it, because something can analyze it for us. But do you think that's what kind of new business opportunities might this bring apart? For example, using data properly. Is there
so the first 5-6 years of my life in a record company, I was an analyst, right? So I'm a numbers guy. I love data. I'm obsessed with data. So I'm really a recovering analyst rather than a record company. And this again is, if you think about the way that success has been measured historically, it's really been relative market share. Yeah. So even today, when there's these huge sums of data coming from all the DSPs, everyone's kind of measuring their success in a known universe. And I think it was General Electric, it was Jack Welch, when General Electric was struggling to grow the business, he eventually decided to make the heads of all his divisions redefine the marketplace that they were in, and to start to use KPIs for that new expanded marketplace. And I think the most profound change that can happen as a result of this extra data, one is understanding fans and consumers and tailoring products to them, and two is redefining the marketplace, having the industry have the ambition to look beyond its existing revenue streams to deliver better experiences. And so, yes, that obviously challenges the existing business models and what people are doing every day, but they're going to have time to transition. And if they're engaged and you bring these skills together, this is not a zero-sum game, but it really is about understanding how you connect the creator with the fan, and everything else is detail. And it's really about harnessing the potential to amplify the potential of the creators, but also the people that work with inside these businesses who are deeply knowledgeable and deeply passionate about this industry's opportunity.
That's for sure.
I really love to listen to you, Pete, but you already know. But you already know that. But I have to create here some conclusion after our webinars. So, in the end, I would like to end up with our webinar with 3 learnings, 3 current hypotheses. So, as we all know, these things are developing at the breakneck speed. So, can we predict any new trends ahead of us? Would you risk to bring your glass ball and tell us something that we don't know already?
Well, listen, and I and again, this is my perspective given my journey to this point. But I think the first thing I'm sure about is we're entering a creative period, a renaissance in music and associated creativity. So I think we're going to see an explosion of different experiences that weren't possible to create and weren't possible to put in front of music fans and music listeners previously. So that's the first thing. The second I'm absolutely certain about is the blurred lines between the physical and the digital realm. And people have been talking about this for the last few years, talking about metaverse but I actually think the real excitement I'm seeing is the ability to take digital experiences that used to happen in your home and take them to spaces like the Lightroom. And if you think about the Sphere, the MGM space in Las Vegas, this huge venue, and if you think about the way that Dolby have invested to bring heightened audio-visual experiences into venues, I think actually, for me, being able to get people in rooms, listening to music, having social experiences, and understanding the stories behind artists. So the second one would be the blurred lines between the physical and the digital realms. And the last one is that this will become highly personalized. And so, you know, there's an executive at Universal Music Group who once said in a meeting to me that vinyl's renaissance is evidence of demand without the product. And I've always agreed with that. As much as I love vinyl, the renaissance that we've seen is evidence that these super fans around the world want better experiences. And so I think really being able to understand what motivates a music fan and being able to monetize that in a way that is sustainable, because most artists who are successful do not want to get more money from their core fan base in the middle of a cost of living crisis. What they want to do is they want to have deeper engagement and they want to have a longer relationship with them. So I think that personalization, hyper-personalization is the last of the three.
Great. As a music fan, I'm waiting for the third point.
Me too. Me too.
Yeah, and I can't even imagine its possibilities yet, but I'm waiting for that to explode and be available for us. The clock is ticking, and we are moving to the next part of the webinar, which is the discussion. We already have some questions, but it's a good moment for our participants. You can just ask questions in the chat window, and we'll choose some of them. So right now, a big thank you, Pete, for sharing this perspective on today's music industries and generative AI. And I'm sure that everyone have some ideas on using it already when it comes to music creation or distribution, or for sure, we touched also the topic of the data and how it can be analyzed. Which is also very important and can influence the success of artists, creators. And we have already some questions on the chat. So let's move to Q&A. And Bartek, would you be, that's nice to read the first question.
Yeah, you're going to pick some easy questions, some easy ones.
Yes. I take the easiest one for you, no problem. So first question is from Mike, and Mike asking, what's your favorite AI-powered tool at the moment? Which one you use personally for finding inspiration?
Oh, for me personally, for finding inspiration, because I'm not making music. I mean, although I'm a very bad drummer and I'm about to become a very bad DJ. I honestly live on Bard and on ChatGPT at least, I'm on there at least 20, 30 times a day, partly because it just acts as a personal assistant that finds information that helps me check that I'm not always just relying on my own knowledge on things. And it just allows me to start to think about the way that these systems work and how they're structured and how they're organized. So for me, if I think about AI platforms in music, I've got to say I love Boomi. I've been playing with it, and the way that they manage people through the experience, I think, is phenomenal. And I can see now why they've managed to garner such usage.
Okay, thank you. So the other question is from Chris. So question from Chris is, will we experience the real revolution in the music industry now with AI?
Well, I think I've already pinned my colours to the mast on that one. I think, yes, I think he's the answer to that question. And I think because of those two, because of the thing about music creators is if there was no music business, there would still be music creators. And I think a lot of people forget that. Yeah. It's like it's a human condition. That's what drives creativity. So if you provide more tools, enable them to be more creative, to engage with more audiences and to have an effect on the world, the supply side of the equation is unquestionably going to be really, really strong. The extent to which that turns into a much healthier music industry, a more sustainable industry, will really depend on the way that distribution and consumption responds to that. But the early signs are very encouraging. So if I think about this in a visual way, I look at a lock and a key, right? So in the creative process, generative AI has already unlocked the opportunity. It's there and it's real. But when it comes to distribution and consumption, we have to wait and see how people respond and react. And the average kind of big corporate takes 6 months to do anything, yeah, and a year to do anything significant. And so if you think about generative AI, we knew about it, most of us, in November of last year. Everybody then goes away on holiday for Christmas, doesn't do anything for a few months. And then March, there was a load of press releases and corporate executives thought about it again. And then everyone went off on the summer holiday. So I think we're only just starting to see how quickly the bigger distribution companies and the bigger services are responding to this. But if you look at Spotify and the way that they've really refocused around the music industry and providing creators tools to build sustainable incomes, I think that there's some reasons to be optimistic.
Yeah, but the extra question from Bartosz, it's me. Will you name it revolution or evolution? Because when it comes to Spotify history, yes, this was kind of revolution, but it takes around 15 years.
Yeah.
So
no, so I think again, distribution is almost as dull today as it was when I joined the industry in 1997, right? I mean, to be perfectly honest, there's very little that I look at in today's music consumption, digital music consumption, that excites me, because it's a fraction of its potential based on the technology that we had 15, 20 years ago. I think the revolution has to come from the creators themselves, because frankly, we're all really in love with this industry and the potential of this industry, both commercial and in terms of its effect on the world around us, because we love music. And then I think what's really for sure is that the tools to innovate around the personal experience, our smart TVs are going to evolve so much so quickly over the next 5 to 10 years. Those two things are unquestionable. It's what happens in the middle that I have a question about. How quickly the distributors and some of the businesses that advocate and support artists, how quickly they can move.
Okay, so there is a last question, and this question will be from Kim. So, Pete, what is the biggest threat of GenAI to creators, labels, and the platforms?
I think, I think medium term, there's no threat, because, music is essential to human life. It will be around in a few hundred years. And so I think we can all be happy about the future of music and the music industry as it evolves. I think the biggest threat in the short term is the agility of some of the existing major participants in the music industry. When I was a record company executive, I lived through Napster. And I always like to say we went through the abbreviated grieving process, which was denial, anger, and acceptance. And during anger, we spent a lot of time on lawsuits. I think it's absolutely right and proper that the organizations that represent artists' rights are focused on credit and compensation right now. However, it's also incredibly important that they're agile and engaging in these new technologies, because if they don't, other industries like esports, where they are much more technically sophisticated, and film, where we're seeing similar moves, are going to eat music's lunch again. So I think it's really important that those bigger players, whilst protecting the rights of their artists, because of course they deserve to be paid for their work, their creative endeavor, they're also agile enough to engage and to help shape the way these technologies evolve, rather than having others do that on the creator's behalf.
Okay, we still have some time, so there is one interesting comment. It's hard to say it's a question, but maybe you can somehow comment to this. It's from Jam, so I will read whole the comment. What do you assume? AI is just some new tech versus AI is a fundamentally different type of tech. Tech useful in movies was best used by the people who made it moving, color, sound. Yes, dedicated people who used all tech they could get to move an industry forward. AI is primarily an entry barrier lowering tech. So rather than the most passionate in a field driving its advancement, many enter it to try around, just a hypothesis. So what is your point of view here?
I think I'd be interested to get your point on this, Bartosz. But I think for me, we don't really know yet anyone. But if you look at what we can already see these tools enabling us to do, and most of the tools we have in our hands are already a year or so out of date, and some of the things that even I see in some of the work that movie studios and games companies are doing, these are tools that can profoundly change the nature of what's being created by the kind of creators. So I think this is more than an accelerant. And if you think about, I've had said to me a number of times in the last few weeks from some of our colleagues that machine learning has been around a while and everyone's getting excited about this, and I think that's a reasonable point, because we don't really know how generative AI is going to evolve. But if I think about multimodal generative AI, and once you start to combine images, video with text, I think it's hard to conclude with any certainty that this isn't a revolution in terms of the art of the possible, what you're able to do. Anyway, I'm the keen amateur techie, so I'll be interested in your perspective on that one.
Okay. Okay, so it's really last question, promise. Let it be a question, because guys, you're attending, you have wonderful questions, and I see it's quite interesting also for me. So last questions is I assume you're from your old friend Christoph. So the question is yes, since music taste is also often mood dependent, do you see any possibilities that the combination of wearables like Apple Watch recording biodata can and AI can play me more mood appropriate music? So are there any first concrete examples?
So listen, I mean, and as Christoph knows, I'm obsessed about this topic. Because I'm involved in digital therapeutics and a number of health-related businesses essentially taking digital therapeutics to scale. And the reason I'm so excited about that area is because right now, there are a couple of 100 million people are using music to self-medicate. Yeah, so people are doing more active listening to music at this point than at any point in human history. So whilst people are talking about people not really listening to music because of the TikTok generation and the way that younger consumers are finding music, the truth is something very different from that. People use music to manage their moods, to give themselves a break from daily life. And I think one of the most huge opportunities that the industry has to affect the world positively is to join those things up. And so as things like heart rate variability find their way into our earpods or our headphones or our devices, I think the ability to understand how music can change our physical being, our mental wellness, is just huge. Yeah. And that for me is, that really is the nirvana. And these tools give us everything that's necessary to do that. We've known for years, the 25,000 papers written on the efficacy of using music to manage mental well-being over the last 50 years, and barely any of them have been implemented in the real world. So I'm with Christoph on this one. I think he's absolutely right.
Okay. Thank you very much, but
thank you.
Unfortunately, we have run out of our time for today. So that's all for now. We hope you enjoy it. If you still have questions about AI or the music industry, you can always find us on the LinkedIn. Just drop us a message and we will get back to you. So, and also remember to follow Miquida on the LinkedIn to stay updated with the latest trends and solutions and everything that will help improve your music business.
Yeah, and finally, check your inboxes for the webinar recording because it's going to be there. A lot of knowledge in here. We put everything in 1 hour. That was great. Thank you, Pete, so much.
My pleasure.
And once again, big thank you to all of you. Stay tuned and see you on the next Innovation Waves Entertainment webinar. Thank you so much. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.